My name's Terry Waldrop. I've been hunting cemeteries for about 37 years now, and this is my friend Ross Scoville. He's been going with me for 2 or 3 years, and we just have a lot of fun trying to help people find their ancestors where they're buried.
I'm Ross Scoville, and I got started at this with Terry through church, really. We go to church together, and Terry needed some help on a deal, and a couple of us went, and I just enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty amazing that somebody still cared about a lot of these cemeteries, and that was about it. I've been doing it ever since, and supplying just companionship, I guess.
In 1982, my dad passed, and it triggered me to start working on my family history. Before 1921, all my ancestors lived in the mountains of North Carolina. I had to go up there and go through a lot of little cemeteries to find them. And I said, if it's that hard for me to go up there and find them, it's got to be hard for people to come here and find them. And so I started looking for them. I put out some flyers. I worked at Freightliner in Mount Holly, and I put a bunch of notices on the board, and people just started coming to me and telling me where they were, and it went from there. 2 ladies, a lady named Maureen Ryan and her friend Sarah Grissop, they were working on the Cloninger and Ryan families, and they asked me if I would tell them where all those people were buried that I could find. And they also had other people tell me where cemeteries were that I could go to. And so I did that. We made a book. All of us together made a book called Old Grave Sites Revisited. And when they got all the information they wanted out of that little get together, I decided to keep making books. So a wonderful lady named Linda Adams Bell from Gaston County, she was a great historian and researcher, and she helped me do the other 2 books that I have. I guess the hardest thing was just getting people to tell me where cemeteries were. I knew where a couple were from hunting with my dad. After I did find some people, after that it kind of snowballed. I was getting people from everywhere coming to me at work, people that I worked with. I worked at Freightliner, and at that time there's almost 3,000 people working there. And so almost every day somebody walked up and asked me if I'd ever been to this cemetery or that. And so that's what I did.
Some of them turn out not to be cemeteries too. We get that,
Yeah.
People see a rock along a fence line or something, and assume that it's a grave. And sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't.
The easiest way to tell where one is if it's got tombstones in it that are carved by professionals, actual mason, I guess you call them, whoever makes the tombstones. If that's there, you know that it's a cemetery. The other way is with just rocks. There'll be a fieldstone head and foot, and there'll be a little depression in the ground where the ground had settled after the person and all was buried, and you can find that. The Germans that came in here, they put periwinkle in their cemeteries. It's ground cover, stays green year round, so it's a sign of everlasting life. The tombstones are facing east, which the Bible says, Jesus will come back from the east. And so there's a lot of religious things that are that help you pick out whether it's really a cemetery or not.
Just once Terry kind of educated me on stuff, what to look for, there's actually quite a few things. one head and shoulder tombstone, and with the bump, and that's an indication. The triangle stone at the foot of a grave, usually is children, and different stuff like that. The military from the beginning of the United States of America till today have memorials, brass memorial plate usually now, with the more information on it rather than just a name and a date, and just a few different things like that. Probably he keeps a couple of secrets to his method, from me, but it's just part of the whole thing that just triggered with me that I like doing it. Sometimes it's comical, but I'm not going to bring any of them up.
Thank you very much. He's thinking about a particular thing that happened to me, and he thought it was funny. But and it was, after we thought about it, it was. I was climbing a hill to get to this cemetery, and it had been raining, and it was in the fall. Leaves had fallen, and I slipped on these leaves and rolled back down the hill. And he thought that was pretty
funny. And it's funny to this day.
Yeah. Okay, the oldest one is a fellow named Adam Costner. Of course, at the time he died, he was Adam Kastner, and it was called the Old Kastner Cemetery. Later on, they changed the name to Costner. The Philadelphia Church Cemetery, that's what it was called when they changed the name. And he died in 1767. There's actually one in Gaston County that's 2 years earlier, and it's in the Smith Cemetery in Belmont. And I'm sure there's earlier burials than that. When they first settled in here, I think they started coming here probably around the 1740s, 1750s. That was about the start of the people coming here, and they didn't have access to tombstones, so they just made field rock. And sometimes you could catch a date on that. Sometimes you can't. There were only about actual 20 big families. I mean, there were some smaller families, but there were about 20 pioneer families that came in this area. About half of them were German, and half of them were Scottish and Irish and French, a few French, the Paysors, which they were called Bayshores back then.
Well, something that amazed me personally was how many there is that he's found over the years, like approaching 400, isn't it?
Well, if you count the churches, it's probably more than that.
Probably, yeah.
We really specialize in the family and abandoned, because everybody knows where the church cemetery is. They're close to the church. But these other ones are a lot harder to find, and so we try to look for them first. But if somebody calls us from another state and says, do you know if my ancestors buried in a certain church? Because a lot of times information comes to them through genealogy that they're buried in a church cemetery, and they just want us to confirm that the person's there, and so we do that. There's people from all over the United States. We've either helped them through texting and photos, or they actually come here. You wouldn't believe how many people come here from.
It is amazing.
All over the United States. Now, the people he helped me with to clean the cemeteries off so they would be able to see them better, they came from Texas. And I don't know, I've had a lot of families from Texas, but also I've had all up and down the West Coast, California, Oregon, Washington. People come from everywhere. Minnesota. I can't. It's almost every state now. Almost. I think there's like 3 states being somebody that we've helped from every state but 3. Well, at first it was just by me putting the flyers up, on bulletin boards. But
Internet,
once I got to
no.
where, I'm sorry.
I said the internet now.
Yeah, now it's the internet, or people will call the library, and Jamie will tell them to call me. Police departments, tax offices. There's just a lot of different ways people get in touch with me. Some of them see the books that we published, the 3 books. They'll find them online, and that's what they do. A lot of times I'll just get a call and they'll say, I'm James Smith from Texas. I want to come out there and see my ancestors that's Orion. Do you know where they're buried? And most times I can tell them right then where they're buried, But if I can't, I say, well, I'll find out where they are if they've got a tombstone, and I'll call you back. And I call them, and she'll say, or he or whoever say, well, we're going to be out there in a couple of weeks. Will you take us to where we can stand beside the grave? And I say, sure, I'll be glad to.
Out of state, sometimes we get calls too, like that might be up in the mountains, or one that comes to mind is the Kings Mountain, and I think it was the federal campgrounds down there or whatever it is, and that was a weird one too. They thought there'd been a church built in there and everything, and somebody had put in just memorial stones, and that was interesting, just to go down and meet them people and talk to them, about it. So it's always something.
Yeah, that was the Kings Mountain Baptist Church, and then there's another one near it. They call it the Applewood Cemetery, and they're both on Kings Mountain. A lot of people think the only cemetery over there is the one that was they put together after the Battle of Kings Mountain, but there's actually 2 more cemeteries that's on the mountain. I'm going to tell this one because to me, it's the best one ever. A woman called me from Seattle, Washington, and she said, I want to come out and see my great-great-grandmother's tombstone. I've heard a story about it, and I want to see if it's true. So I said, well, what's the story? She said, well, I'll tell you when I get there. So she came, she picked me up, I took her to the cemetery, and on the way to the cemetery, she said, here's the story. When my great-great-grandmother was dying of cancer, her husband hired a woman to come in and clean the house and take care of her, till she died. Well, he started having an affair with this woman that was helping. And so right before she died, she called her children in and she said, I want you to bury me at the church. That'll be good. And you can bury your daddy at the church, but don't bury him beside me. I don't want him buried beside me. And the children agreed. This is the story she told me. So we get to the cemetery and we walk in, and I find her great-great-grandmother's grave, and about 3 rows back and 4 tombstones over it is where he was buried. So the story that she had heard for years since she was a child was a true story. And to me, that's the most unusual one. There's really 2 factors in cemeteries and genealogy. You got people that are doing genealogy. Well, there's people all around me. It's kind of like a network of people. People that are historians, people that are genealogists, and then you got the other side where you got people that hunt cemeteries, or they do. I can think of a couple of guys that all they do is hunt for Civil War veterans, or they hunt for Revolutionary War soldiers. And so it's a big bunch of people. It's not just me and Ross. It's a lot of people. And there's been some great ones that have passed. People like I mentioned Linda Adams Bell, Wilma Craig was one, Ann Keener from Lincolnton was one, and these were women that helped me a lot. And of course I already mentioned Reen Ryan and Sarah Grissop. And then I got them that are still alive that help a lot. People like Robert Carpenter, he's I think he's a retired educator now. He's written a few books. He still teaches genealogy, so he's been a big help to me. He's always helped me when I ask him. People like Ann Dellinger, she's a great historian. Ramona Ramsey from Krause, she really knows her genealogy and history. So there's people all around you. I can't name them all. Greg Paysor, a retired educator that's really into this kind of stuff. So there's people all around me, that keep everything kind of in one place. So if you're doing that, if you want to do genealogy, right now the computer's the way to go. findagrave.com is a great one. I mean, it's got 160 some million burials from all over the world that you can look up. And then you got ancestry.com. They're great. I think you have to pay for Ancestry now, and Ancestry recently bought Find a Grave, but you don't have to pay for it yet, but I'm sure they'll find a way to do that. But some big corporation now, some conglomerate has bought out Ancestry, which means, they got Find a Grave at the same time. So I don't know what it's going to be like, but those are your two best bets for genealogy. If you do find a grave on your land, there's certain rules. North Carolina has a set of cemetery rules, laws. You need to find those and look them up, and they'll tell you what you can do. You can't destroy them anymore. It's a federal law now that you cannot destroy a cemetery, because if you do and you get caught, it's a pretty tough penalty. But you should make sure it gets put on your deed for your land, and the cemetery laws say you don't have to do anything to the cemetery. You can't destroy it, but at the same time, you're not responsible to keep it up. If a tree falls on it or lightning hits it or, something like that, you're not required to fix it. The law doesn't require you to do that. And you can't keep people from coming to that cemetery. A lot of people say, the cemetery's on my land, you can't go to it. Well, you can go to it. You have to go through a certain process. Like if I walked up and said, I want to see this cemetery, and the person says, well, you can't see it. And I'll say, okay, well, what I have to do then is go to the clerk of court in whatever county it is and say, I want to go to this cemetery, and the guy won't let me go. Well, then they make arrangements to where you can go. You cannot be kept out of any cemetery in North Carolina. I don't know about other states. Some are kept up. There's a lot that are kept up. There's been a lot more ever since Roots came out, the book, and people started getting into their family history. cemeteries that were abandoned are now being kept up. And then I had some where I went to them years ago and they were being kept up, but that person died or maybe had a stroke or they moved away, and now that cemetery is, for all intents and purposes, abandoned. So it goes both ways.
You run into a lot of damage in the older cemeteries naturally, you know, but there is people out there that do repair them. I mean, you know, and I think that's wonderful, and it's spotty though, you know.
Yeah, we've got a friend, and he lives in Mecklenburg County, but he's got a lot of ancestors in a little cemetery in Belmont called the Smith Cemetery, and him and his wife both found out that they had a lot of ancestors in that cemetery. Well, the first time I went to that cemetery, I had to crawl on my hands and knees all the way through that cemetery just to write down what was on the tombstones. It was grown up that big. But he found out that he had those kin people buried in there, and he decided he would keep it up. He would get permission, so he got permission from Gaston County, and he's turned it into a beautiful little cemetery now. It's really nice. He put a fence around it. He straightened all the tombstones up. He repaired the ones that were broke. He did everything that you need to do to have a nice cemetery, and he did it. And his wife wrote a book about it too. And their names are Lee and Melanie Ford. Yeah, well, they could just do like me, just ask around. You can't get in your car and ride over to this forest and start walking through it and saying, well, maybe there's a cemetery in here. You gotta have some kind of direction. Guys used to walk up to me at work and say, I was rabbit hunting over on Joe's place, and we walked through a little cemetery over there. And so, see, I had to go find Joe and get permission. You got to get permission from the owners. Don't ever go, you know. I mean, I wanted in this cemetery really bad one time, and I couldn't find out anything. But I finally went to the tax office and found out the woman that owned the property lived in Florida. So I just called her. You know, her number was on file. I called her and said, I'd like to go look at this little cemetery. Do you mind? She said, no, go ahead. Yeah, just find out who owns the land and ask them first. That's a basic rule. You don't ever, I mean, you're trespassing. You could get shot, especially nowadays. You know, you could get, you make them mad and then they don't want to show you the cemetery. And that just makes it harder later on. If you want to go to the cemetery and you have to go through all the legal stuff, why not just be nice to start with and do what you're supposed to do?
Lincoln County GIS program, I use that a lot myself. That's really, because it gives you all the information you need to start with, you know, name and address, phone number sometimes not.
Yeah, and of course Gaston County does the same. Well, we just
I like them.
We wanted people to know, like, we want them to know when we go to that cemetery while we're going, because we hunt tombstones, we hunt cemeteries, and the Terry is just a play on my name, Tombstone Terrytory instead of Territory, like in the. I'm sure the movie is a whole lot more interesting than our hats, but it's just something fun we like to do. Well, I guess the biggest thing is your reference libraries, you know, the reference rooms in the libraries, like the one where Jamie sets her work. She does a wonderful job. You can ask her anything. She'll try to help you. That's one of the best things to do. If you get to a hard place and you don't know what to do next, you know, Jamie can help you, or whoever's whatever reference room you go to, those folks are there to help you, and they'll do it.
Yeah, the people, are unique in that aspect, I think, because, like I said, the biggest surprise to me was that you have people now that care, really do, and that's good.